All right, so this is section 2 of chapter 5, The Road to Revolution. And I recorded section 1, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. So now I'm not even really sure what it was I recorded. I know it was all factual information, but I cannot for the life of me remember it. Oh well. So, all right, west of the Appalachian Mountains, after 1763, we have okay, so after the French and Indian War, we have the British formally owning any of the land west of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, just because a treaty says that you own it does not necessarily confirm that you own it. It just says that, oh, yeah, this is yours. But that is also kind of, never mind. I'm just not going to say that. So the Native Americans who are living west of the Appalachian Mountains are trying very hard to keep the lands that they have. So fighting between Native Americans and our white settlers, the book makes it sound like, everything was fine and lovely until after the war ended. And then they were like, oh, I guess we're going to war with each other now. But really it was, people have always, they were fighting the entire time. It wasn't just like, oh, well, we're done with this war, so let's start another one. No, it was like they're coming into conflict with each other constantly. In the last days of our French and Indian War, so as the war is winding down, the leader of the Ottawa Nation, his name was Pontiac, he gets an alliance together with Western Native American tribes, and he and his allies attack British forts and settlements. Really beginning in May of 1763. So this area is, he is going and attacking British forts. The reason why this is specifically said British is because the French still had forts there. And part of the Treaty of Versailles that ended the French and Indian War was, hey, the British have to get the French out. Like they kind of have to go and take possession of the forts. And it's difficult because you need manpower to do that. So really, you still had some French hanging out in what's considered the West at that time. About half a dozen British forts in the West are destroyed. And the Pontiac War ends up killing around 2,000 settlers. So in response, the British attack as well, and they start attacking and killing Native American tribes who had not attacked them. It's kind of one of those, I'm going to kill them first before they can kill me. Finally, in August, and a battle near Fort Pitt, remember it had been Fort Duquesne, the British defeat Pontiac's forces. So he and his people that were still left still tried to fight for another year or so, but by all intents and purposes, by the fall of 1764, our war is over. So even with uniting many, many different tribes together, it's not enough to kick the British out of this area. So the British, they want to limit the amount of time, energy, manpower that they have to expend on this area. It's very sparsely populated. These people that are technically British subjects that are settling it, they don't matter. Yeah, great, you're there, but really and truly, they don't matter. So Britain is sitting here saying, look, we don't want to pay for, money-wise or manpower-wise, another battle with Native Americans on this frontier. There are no roads. It's very difficult to get troops in and out. You can't supply them. So they're like, we need to just stop this. The British government issues something called the Proclamation of 1763. In this, there's a line drawn along the Appalachian Mountains. If you're looking at the picture right here, it is labeled. The pink part is the part that the British said, okay, we're just going to give that to the Native Americans. British people, you are not allowed there. They were allowed in the red parts. They were told, the British settlers are told they have to stay to the east of this line. Now, that doesn't work. Honestly, it probably made things worse because when someone says, hey, you cannot go past this line, the first thing most people want to do is cross it. So this made a lot of colonists angry because they thought that they had the right to like live and work and do whatever they wanted to wherever they wanted to. And so this proclamation was pretty much ignored. I mean, the British were like, hey, you need to do it. But the settlers, on the most part, said, no, thank you. All right, so in the French and Indian War, our colonists are pretty proud of what they did. This is kind of one of the first points where they have a lot to do in a conflict. They are militia. Um, in the British military tradition, you did not fight if you weren't in the military, if you weren't already in the army. So the fact that your citizens, your ordinary everyday citizens kind of stepped forward and said, we're going to fight for our land, we're going to fight and, unite with our countrymen, which is, how they thought of the British soldiers. This made them very, very proud. Many of these civilians had died in the war. And in Massachusetts, I mean, they lost more than 1,500 men. So this is not an insubstantial role that our settlers played. They thought that Britain would be grateful for the roles that they played in this war. Shockingly to no one but them, they were not that grateful. The colonists also expected any kind of taxation or raise in taxes that would be needed to offset the cost of this war. They didn't think it was going to be very much. It's kind of like, hey, we worked with you. We had people die at the same time. We have already expended blood trying to protect this. So maybe don't raise my taxes. But, all right, so before we get to anything else, you need to understand like the relationship of colonies to each other. There is no United States of America. There's no concept of, okay, well, we're all in this together. Let's work together and then we'll be more powerful. They were still very divided and kind of distracted by territorial squabbles. The people, though, living in these colonies definitely saw themselves as different from people living in Britain, but they also considered themselves loyal British subjects. So, I mean, you have people that kind of say, okay, well, these, I live in Virginia, these Pennsylvanians are definitely more like me than someone who lives in England. But we are all loyal to the British crown. We are all British subjects. So, like it's almost like, what is more similar and then what is a little bit less similar. And, it kind of goes in ascending order or descending. I think it's ascending. I don't know, some sort of order. But our British, especially the people working in the government, they are not looking at the colonists the same way. The French and Indian War was very expensive. It's really just the North American theater of something called the 7 Years' War. This war it lasts for 7 years. I love it when things are really funny like that. It lasts for 7 years, and they also end up fighting Spain a little bit. Like, it's very complicated, but it leaves Britain very much in debt. And the British government then feel that they have to keep British troops in North America to make sure that France doesn't say, okay, well, we're just going to wait till they leave, and then we're going to take back all our possessions. So the British government's like, hey, troops, you stay there and make sure that the French can't invade and, can't try to take back the territory that we have rightfully taken from them. They also were looking at these attacks that are happening, the whole reason why they had to make the Proclamation of 1763, right? Yes, I'm really bad at numbers. So the Proclamation of 1763, the entire reason why they needed that is because the settlers and the Native Americans are coming into conflict. So they were like, hey, why don't y'all chill out and make sure that the colonists and the natives aren't fighting with each other. They kind of have this feeling, the British, like the British government does, that all of this money that was expended to protect the colonies and to even add more land to the colonies, the people who benefited from it should kind of have to pay for it. So they're looking at North America saying, look, like we sent British soldiers. We sent them across the ocean. We made sure they had supplies. We did all this stuff to protect you from the French. So now it is your responsibility to help us pay for that. What do we think the colonists thought? No, nobody ever wants to pay more. Okay, so to pay off this debt, the British imposed taxes on the colonies. And in 1764, Parliament passes the Sugar Act, which is an import tax, kind of like a tariff, on lots of different products, but mainly molasses. And if you remember from chapter 4, molasses is being used to make like rum, because if you like boil down sugar, it comes molasses, and then you use sugar to make rum. So it's this whole big thing. Anyway, they also, in the Sugar Act of 1764, any kind of smuggling is very harshly punished under this law. And I mean, your colonists are well-known smugglers, so they are not too pleased about it at all. After this, we have what's called the Quartering Act. So this directly ties to the Third Amendment, and whenever anyone asks me what my favorite amendment is, I always say it's the third one, because people are like, that's such a weird specification. But it goes back to these laws that the British pass to try to make up some revenue. So Parliament passes the Quartering Act in 1765, and the purpose of this is to save the British Crown money. They're being very cheap. So to make sure that the Proclamation of 1763 is enforced, the British have sent 10,000 soldiers into the colonies, like I just said. This Quartering Act says, colonists, okay, you have to house these troops, and you have to give them food, and you have to give them supplies. The British Crown is not going to do it. You're responsible for it, because the whole reason why they're there is to make sure you're safe. So take care of it, thank you, and we're going to save a whole lot of money by doing this. The colonists, again, did not like this at all, and they protested vehemently and said Parliament is violating their rights. Now we get to our Stamp Act, and it's like the Parliament is just deaf. They are completely tone deaf to what is happening in the colonies. And because of this, they just keep passing these taxes that they think are gonna, I don't know if they think they're gonna be better, or, no one likes taxes, but especially when the taxes are on like really dumb things. So the Stamp Act is passed in early of 1765, and this act required that colonists had to buy taxes. They had to buy stamps, and that was actually the tax, to put on all kinds of products and activities, mainly anything that has to do with paper. And most people are like, okay, well, we'll just stop like reading books. I don't read books anyway, but we're just not going to do that. But really, it also meant that these particular stamps had to be put on newspapers. They had to be put on wills. That's pretty important. Licenses, insurance policies, land titles, contracts. Any legal document had to have one of these stamps. So if you're a lawyer, you're not going to be real happy about that, especially if that's how you make your money.